Good morning, open source fans, and welcome back to sunny San Francisco, California. We have the pleasure of being at Chainguard assembled today. My name is Savannah Peterson, joined by my favorite analyst, Jackie McGuire.
Hello.
Jackie, we're off to a cool start. There's some awesome stuff going on in this community.
Yeah, there is, and usually when I'm in a security conference, I feel like an outsider looking in, but since I've actually built a ton of things with VMs and containers, I actually feel like one of the cool kids here, so that's exciting.
First of all, you are always one of the cool kids, but second of all, I am very glad that you feel that way today. I also feel pretty cool. We get to see some old friends, talk about some cool projects. We've got Dan Lorenc joining us. This is kind of your day, Dan. Thank you so much for being here to hang out with us.
Thanks, and it is sunny in San Francisco, strangely enough.
That's
the
literally
weather's
why
amazing.
I pointed it out. I feel like the whole world thinks we live under a blanket.
I didn't want them to think you were kidding.
You're
so,
right.
Yeah.
I went out to get coffee this morning.
Proof, Dan, means a lot, means a lot.
I didn't need a winter jacket to get coffee this morning. I was like,
sunglasses.
I know, it's crazy. I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I am here for it. We even have beautiful windows at this fabulous event. Thanks to y'all. I'm just going to dive right into it. We talk about velocity and we talk about security. They are not always synonyms. Y'all seem to be proving that wrong. So how do you not sacrifice velocity when you're building software securely?
Yeah, I think the background of security, kind of the old scar tissue relationships that built up there, where security teams always yelling, no, you can't do that, getting in developers' way, file tickets for anything you want to do. And that changed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. One of my hot takes, anyway, the reason Docker and containers and everything blew up so quickly was they gave developers the power to do things that they used to have to file tickets for, and talk to IT or talk to security or talk to whoever it was whose job it was to install things on your system.
That's a really good point.
And it was a win for both, SRE teams and sysadmin teams, because you could just install the Docker daemon and then nobody had to bother you anymore. But then for developers, it was like, oh, awesome, I can install whatever I need and I don't have to ask anyone permission anymore and I can just go deploy it. And then years and years later, the pendulum starts to swing and it's like, oh wow, they've just been deploying whatever they wanted without asking. How do we get this back under control? Like, how do we start to rein this back in, this kind of wild west of container landscapes? Like, every container is on its own distro, every container has its own versions of everything.
900 dependencies.
It's great for velocity, that's not, that's not great for security unless you think about that stuff a little bit more upfront, come up with ways to manage it, and shift a lot more of that left. Like, I think the whole shift left buzzword is really security teams running left because that's where all the work has now started to happen and they have to get farther upstream. But when you do that right, now they're working closer with development teams, they're embedded, they're working hand in hand. And then you can get back to that, like, keep going fast, keep doing what you need to do, and now we're with you, we're not gatekeepers sitting on the other side of the wall.
And open source acting as bumpers on the bowling lane is sort of how I think about it sometimes, to make sure that development's collaborative and good. How much is that a role in what you're developing at Chainguard?
Yeah, open source is everywhere now. Everyone uses open source, it's great. But you still have to think about it. Like, you can't just grab any code, any version of it, and forget about it forever. Open source, it works. Linus's law, all eyes make many bugs shallow, that kind of famous quote. But you still have to have a plan for what you're going to do when you adopt that open source and when you start using it. It's not a one-time thing. Like, every project you grab depends on other projects, and you're really kind of standing on a treadmill that's moving. And if you stop moving and forget about it, you get flung off the back of the treadmill. And the higher up in the stack you go, it's like a whole series of treadmills stacked on top of each other, all running at different paces.
This is a really good visual and also really gnarly.
Yeah, it's you can imagine just falling off if you forget to keep going. And all the treadmills like flying around.
I've seen a scene from Severance where you're just like rolling
like
back.
We could probably use Sora or
example.
something to make some cool video visualization of this. But yeah, it's free to get started with, but you have to have a plan to upgrade everything constantly. Otherwise, you're going to get flung off the back because all those eyes are going to find all of the bugs, and then you're vulnerable. And the work comes later. The work doesn't come when you first start using it.
And I think there's almost an assumption that the more prevalent an open source piece of code is, the more safe it is. And then we had executils. And we had an adversary that was willing to spend years contributing to an open source program so that they could eventually do something nefarious with it. And so there's almost there's an inherent trust I think people have in widely used open source software that maybe we should second guess.
I I think you bring up a really good point, Jackie, and I would love your hot take on this, Dan, is, so, okay, just because it's open source doesn't mean it's impermeable, and it also doesn't mean that there's not an increasing number of attacks on that software, knowing that that's embedded in a lot of different companies across verticals. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's this magical like ecosystem that's worked for so many years. There's no easy way to explain it. Like, there's no reason people should just be there's no reason people should just be writing this amazing high quality software and giving it away for free. And it's written by strangers on the internet.
It gives me hope,
for the most part, it does.
It does. Like, straight up in my heart.
For the most part, people are good.
Yeah.
But like, what's that rule? Like, if 1 in 1,000 people on the internet is an asshole, like then like that's going to fill up your Twitter feed, or that's going to fill up whatever social media you're on. And the scale of open source is to the point now where 1 in 1,000 people. You mentioned 900 library dependencies. Like, you're at the scale where a couple of them are probably going to be not nice people, and you have to think about that. And you can't, like, blind trust works until it doesn't.
Yeah. Let's talk about regulators.
Oh yeah.
And liability.
Yeah.
We're in a unique climate
What's worse,
right
regulators
now.
or attackers?
Well, yeah.
Depends on how much money you have to deal with.
No, it's the two groups that get CISOs worried. It's hackers and lawyers.
Yeah. Oh no, exactly. Well, and I think in some cases one could argue, metaphorically, they're both. But that's maybe taking it to the next level. But how do you navigate the landscape? There's a lot going on geopolitically. There's a lot going on institutionally. Yeah. What's your approach and your advice for your community?
It's a lot going on, and you have to pay attention to it. You can't ignore it. Geopolitically, like the XUtils, most people think it was some state actor from somewhere else. They're groups of people that have time. I think you'd be incompetent or irresponsible if you were some state actor and you don't have 10 people out there just writing code and trying to get it adopted. Just so later you have a place you can slip malware in the end. It's so cheap. You just have to have patience. But then you also have sanctions, and the Linux Foundation just put out this long set of guidelines and recommendations for maintainers of projects, because you're subject to like US OFAC sanctions, which are terrifying if you take contributions from people on the sanctioned entity list. And these are like the really scary sanctions where you need to, it's not enough for you to not know the person was sanctioned. Like, even if you took code from them or conversed with them, you're still liable and you're still guilty even if you didn't know. Like, you have to have, the burden of proof is on you to make sure you check that nobody was on these lists. And they had to go and remove a bunch of Russian kernel maintainers from the kernel development process because of this stuff. Like, that's real jail time.
Yeah.
And, open source is kind of this fun hippie community of everybody just giving away free stuff on the internet, but the intersection of real laws and real geopolitical tensions means everybody can't just be nice and fun and
you can't just
cool
assume
work.
nice because we're a part of this community.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, I think, as well when regulations are moving in 1,000 different directions.
Yeah.
So you have Europe, who's increasingly tightening
They
privacy.
almost banned open source this year.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just because they didn't understand what they were doing, and it got so close that, the liability stuff they tried to do in the first version of the CRA was terrifying when it came out. Yeah. If you as a maintainer put software on the internet and it got used by some bank or some company in Europe, even if you've never met them, no commercial relationship, and they got breached as a result, you could be personally liable for that.
Mm-hmm. It's wild to think about.
Yeah. And that almost made it out. It was very close, and they changed it a little bit, and it's still not great. Yeah. Now foundations have to assume a lot of this liability, which isn't fun.
Well, it's interesting. So I started my career in finance, and I spent 15 years in finance. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're all sorry. That's why we brought Jackie over.
In 2005 too. So I made it through the financial crisis. No, but then after the financial crisis, I worked with CFOs, and having watched the entire world burn down around them, having watched companies with $300 million in the bank go bankrupt because they couldn't touch that $300 million. Working with CFOs feels a lot like working with CISOs right now, in that they're scared. They feel like everything they're doing is reactive, and there's so many different regulations coming at them from so many different places, they don't know what to do. What I find to be an extra layer of ick in security is we also haven't had enough litigation to determine who actually has liability. So we did see, a few, the SolarWinds prosecutions, the Target breaches, And so we have seen a little bit of consequence, but there really is no equivalent of a fiduciary duty for security professionals. So at the end of the day as a CISO, I have no idea whether my D&O insurance is actually going to cover an open source package that goes sideways in one of my containers that I didn't even know existed.
You see this show up in public company SEC filings under like the risks of the business section. You see it show up of like, we depend on a lot of code from a lot of people that don't work here, and a breach to that could disrupt our business. And that's disclosed, and hopefully it doesn't turn into securities fraud like everything does at the end of the day. If for any Matt Levine fans out there. But yeah, I think the push to liability reform, at least in the US, we'll see how it continues to go this year under the new administration, but it's a pretty sane take, and it's like, let's codify a bar of best practices. And it's similar to, say, malpractice in the legal field or malpractice in medicine. If you show up to surgery drunk and leave a scalpel in someone and stitch them back up, like, that's malpractice. That's very different than like, you tried hard, followed all the best practices, and still weren't able to get a great outcome. Right. And what we've been missing is that like uniform bar of what are the best practices in security.
So I've been lobbying for establishing those for MSPs, because I think that's a great place to start, and that a lot of CISOs of like, if I'm a CISO of a small company, I don't even know what standard of care I'm supposed to be holding myself to. I'm just like, I've got EDR and we've got a SIM, we're good, right? And that's usually what I hear. So I 100% agree in that nobody likes extra regulation, but I feel like the lack of clarity that not having those responsibilities brings both creates murky, like hand the bag to somebody else, as well as CISOs can't stand up to their executive team and board and say, no, I am at the end of the day liable for this. This is the decision. I am the executive, that is in charge of this type of liability.
And the other frustrating part of security, I think what makes it a lot different is it's a multiplayer game at the end of the day. Like in other forms of engineering, my background's mechanical engineering. Like people know how to build bridges that aren't going to fall down. People know how to build airplanes, hopefully, that will stay in the air, that kind of thing. But pretend you're flying in that airplane over a war zone. Like, it's very different if somebody's actively trying to take down your bridge or shoot something down. And you can do the best you possibly can, and you can like be winning and have like cutting edge for security practices and still get breached at the end of the day because somebody else might have more resources and might just spend more and more time attacking you. And so that's why like setting that kind of baseline of like what are best practices, and it can vary too depending on sensitivity and criticality, and a small mom and pop laundromat like shouldn't need the same level of investment as somebody storing crypto wallets and everything, but figure out what that is, and if you do all of that, then sure, you tried your best and still got hacked. You might still get fined, but it's very different from like, oh, you didn't even set up HTTPS, or like passwords are stored in plain text. Like that's negligence now, and we can talk about different levels.
That's the malpractice.
Exactly.
To extend that analogy, I'd be curious. Actually, I want to ask both of you this question since we're kind of in a position to do that on the news desk today. If you could tell these regulators around the world one thing right now and have them listen, what would you tell them to preserve the integrity of all this work?
You go first.
I would tell
them
that middle schoolers are smart enough to learn about cybersecurity, and we have taken the stance in the enterprise for years that not all jobs are tech jobs, and that we only need detailed security and tech training for those people. Every single job in every single enterprise is a tech job now. They all touch data, they all touch vulnerable services. We treat people as if security is this very scary technical thing they can't understand, and understanding the difference between PII and HIPAA data and OFAC data, we can absolutely educate people so that they understand the types of data that we're dealing with, and that I think would nip what statistics say 80% of attacks originate at the endpoint with the user. That would drastically reduce those rates. I think we need to stop treating people like they can't understand security and make everybody in the enterprise security literate, and that should be a requirement for any enterprise with over X number of revenue or employees.
And a little more thorough than the training video that Dustin was referencing in our earlier interview. It's empowering people to protect themselves rather than walking down and picking up that USB stick and sticking it on the side of their laptop. All right, we've bought you enough time, Dan.
Okay, I would start by saying security is very, very hard, but similar to what you said, the basics aren't that hard. And we have a lot of this technology already, and we'll get much better outcomes by making sure that those basics are more globally rolled out, more universally rolled out than we will by slapping fines and throwing people in jail at the high end where they are under the most threat and under the most attack. We have the technology, we just have to use it, and that's the best place for regulators to focus.
I agree with that. And looking at, to your point, ending it with the user on edge devices, there's so many little things that happen that are preventable. All right. So you've been playing in this space with Chainguard for a decade now. Happy 10-year anniversary. Big deal for you all. What happens over the next decade? I know you've announced big partnerships today. We've got software supply chain, we've got libraries, we've got VMs. What does the future of the Chainguard community and customer solution stack look like?
I think it's like we talked about earlier. We want to build a safe source for all open source. Open source is about code. That's where developers want to write. That's where they want to contribute. It's not about all of those links in the chain that get that code into a place enterprises need to run it. And that's where the problems are, and that's where we step in and help out. I think it frees up open source maintainers to just do what they want to do and move fast and build new features and release new versions of the code. And it solves the gap between getting that stuff into companies, into enterprises in the way that they need to use it.
I love that, and I think it's a humble but very accurate way of describing it. It's just empowering people to do better work, which is really what you all are about. What are some of the specific outcomes that have gotten you personally excited as a leader at Chainguard that you've been able to see within your customers, obviously with respect to privacy and security?
Yeah, it's both how quick the solutions are to implement, like it's hours before people start getting value after they try something, and then how much time they save on an ongoing basis. This is something that developers don't like to do. It's a tax that gets in the way of them doing the work that they do. Like, my background is a developer, and selling to developers is really hard because they always have this culture of like, well, I could just build that myself. Why would you pay someone else to do that kind of thing? But this isn't work that they like to do. This isn't work that's fun. This isn't work that adds value to their customers and teams. And seeing those results, see how quick they get value out of our products, and then seeing how much value they get on an ongoing basis as time adds up, is rewarding.
Reminds me when my dad wouldn't buy a coffee table and end tables because he could build them himself, so he built them himself, and then when we moved 2 years later, when we moved 2 years later, they completely fell apart because he built them as quick as he could, and my dad was not a great carpenter. So I see that in a lot of enterprises, and like, it works for right now, but if you move any piece of it, it's all gonna break.
Well, there's no reason we need to reinvent the wheel when we can all be driving super awesome, happy cars that are more sustainable than the other things that we were building back in the past, which is really exciting. You've done a great job recruiting outstanding people. Final question for you here today. What would you tell someone who's watching our show here, who's curious about joining the open source community or being a part of the Chainguard community, an interested young future cybersecurity expert potentially? What's your advice?
It's not that hard. Anyone can contribute to open source. There's lots of projects. They all need help. Just jump in. And at Chainguard, we're hiring all across the board. We have junior roles in engineering, we have senior roles. Lots of opportunity in both open source and security.
We love to hear it. What would your advice be, Jackie?
Yeah, it's not as hard as you think it is. And what I also have found in security more than any other industry I've worked in is, one, I think it is the best industry for women that I have worked in, and that the incidences of unpleasantness that you typically experience in a woman in business are lower in security than any other industry I've worked in. And also... Oh yeah,
you came from finance.
Yeah. And the music business. But also that in security, people spend years accumulating knowledge, and all they really want to do is share it. So there are very few people who, if you reach out with a request, like, hey, I want to learn about this, do you have time? Most people will take the time to teach you. And so I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, that person's a super smart engineer, developer, and like, I don't want to ask for their time. And what I tell younger people all the time is, I feel like everything I've learned is for nothing if I can't pass it on. So trust people that they want to give you the knowledge that they've accumulated, and always ask the stupid question. Because if you have a stupid question that you want to ask, I guarantee there are 5 other people who wanted to ask that question and were afraid. So that's the other thing. The only stupid question is the one that goes unasked.
Love that. I think I've found that someone who came into the security community later in her technology career, everyone's really welcoming. I mean, I think it's also a bit of a cyclical of the open source community and a part of that, a halo effect, so to speak, of that ethos. But Yeah, say hi. Like, I think it's the first step is always the scariest, but I think everyone, when you start talking to all of us, we all just want to nerd out and chat about it, whether that's your own personal cell phone security, your burner phone, or whatever like we've been talking about lately, or whatever that might be. I think it matters. Okay, sorry, I have one more question for you because I asked Dustin this and I want to compare your answers.
Is this going to be a stupid question? No.
Maybe. We'll find out. I'll let you be the judge of that, Dan.
You're about to ask it, so it's not a stupid question. There we go.
Well, according to Jackie, really self-affirming here today on the show. What do you think is the biggest myth in security right now?
The biggest myth?
You're having a lot of customer conversations.
Biggest myth in
I imagine
security.
you're doing a lot of customer education. What's the broken record you feel a little bit is on repeat as you're ramping people up?
I mean, the biggest myth, I think, is that probably that perfect security is possible. I don't think it is. And yeah, that if you do all of the right things, buy all the right products, follow all the best practices, you can still get hacked. Yeah, there's no guarantee of perfection anywhere here in security.
Yeah. I think that's the most honest possible answer you could have given in that moment, and all you can do is help decrease that vulnerability with working with folks like Chainguard. Dan, thank you so much for inviting us to your party and taking the time today.
Thanks for joining.
Our pleasure. This has been an
sunny San Francisco.
I know, here we are.
Yeah,
you heard it first. You heard it proven first here by Dan. Jackie, thank you for another fabulous segment. And what a wonderful first half of the day here. And thank all of you for tuning in to our power-packed coverage here at Chainguard Assemble in, as now socially validated, sunny San Francisco. My name is Savannah Peterson. You're watching theCUBE, the leading source for enterprise tech news.